I never thought the day would come when I'd be sitting in the CEO chair of a multimillion-dollar company, staring at a contract that would determine the fate of my parents' entire legacy. The irony was almost too much to bear. Years ago, they had looked me in the eye, thanked me for everything I'd done, and then fired me from the family business as if I was some temporary intern they couldn't afford to keep. They cut me off without hesitation, choosing to keep my lazy brother on payroll because, according to them, family comes first. Apparently, I wasn't part of the family. But before I tell you about that moment of betrayal, I need to explain how we even got here. I was raised in a small town where everyone knew each other and reputation meant everything. My parents owned a medium-sized business, a retail and supply company that had been in our family for 2 generations. When I was a kid, it wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. While other kids were spending their summers at camp or hanging out at the pool, I was stocking shelves, sweeping floors, and learning how invoices worked before I even learned how to drive. I didn't complain. In fact, I wore it like a badge of honor. I wanted to prove myself, to show my parents I was worthy of one day taking over. I was the kind of kid who woke up at 6 a.m. during high school to help unload deliveries before class, and then came back after basketball practice to help close up. My brother, on the other hand, barely showed up. He'd roll in late, spend more time in the break room than on the floor, and somehow still get praised for trying. I told myself it didn't matter. If I worked hard enough, if I gave enough of myself to the business, they'd see who really cared. And for a while, it seemed like it was paying off. By the time I was in college, I was already managing parts of the operation. I helped implement new systems, brought in more efficient processes, and even negotiated with vendors to cut costs. The business was growing, and I was proud, so damn proud, to be part of it. I had dreams of one day modernizing the company completely. I sketched out ideas, researched industry trends, and even pitched plans to my parents during dinner. They'd nod politely, sometimes even say they were impressed. And I believed them. I believed that my future was secure, that my loyalty would be rewarded. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was, because no matter how much sweat, time, and energy I poured into that business, it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. My parents didn't value dedication or competence. They valued comfort. And comfort meant protecting my brother, no matter how useless he was. The real kicker? At the time, I still didn't see it. I thought I was indispensable. I thought they'd never let me go. If only I'd known that the very business I bled for would one day spit me out like I was nothing, and that years later, I'd be the one holding the knife that would cut it down for good. When people talk about family businesses, they often romanticize it. This idea that everyone works together, building something special with love and unity. For me, it wasn't romantic. It was sacrifice, plain and simple. Every ounce of my time, energy, and even relationships outside the business were put on the chopping block for the sake of keeping the family company running. In college, while my classmates were partying, traveling, and building their social networks, I was commuting back home every weekend to help my parents. Most of the time, I didn't even get paid. If I asked for gas money, my dad would chuckle and say, "You're investing in your future." So I believed him. I thought one day this company would be mine. I thought one day all these lost experiences, all these hours spent stocking shelves instead of living my own life, would pay off. My friends stopped inviting me out after a while. They got tired of hearing me say, "Sorry, I've got to head home to work." I missed weddings, road trips, even a chance to study abroad because my parents' guilt tripped me with lines like, "What would we do without you?" And I fell for it every single time. I told myself I was being loyal, that this was my duty. Meanwhile, my brother, let's call him Jake, was the complete opposite. He'd breeze in whenever he felt like it, wearing sunglasses indoors, acting like the place was beneath him. He'd disappear for hours on errands that mysteriously ended at bars or his girlfriend's apartment. Whenever I pointed it out, my parents brushed it off. "He's still young," my mom would say. "He'll grow into it." He never did. What stung the most wasn't just Jake's laziness. It was the way my parents defended him at every turn. If I made a mistake, I got lectured for hours about responsibility and how the family's reputation depended on me. If Jake messed up, they'd laugh and say, That's just Jake being Jake. Still, I kept pushing forward. I worked ridiculous hours, studied business administration while simultaneously running payroll, negotiating supplier contracts, and training new hires. I practically lived at the office. I became the go-to person for everything. Fixing the Wi-Fi, handling tax paperwork, even calming down angry customers. I thought I was proving myself indispensable. I remember one specific night during my junior year of college. Finals week. I had an exam the next morning, but a last-minute delivery came in late. My dad called me at 10 p.m. Panicked because he didn't trust Jake to handle it. So I drove an hour back home, unloaded a truck in the freezing cold, organized inventory until 3 a.m., and then drove back to campus just in time to shower and sprint to class. I ended up bombing the exam. My GPA took a hit, but my dad shook my hand the next day and told me he was proud of me. I ate up that praise like it was gold. Looking back, that was the pattern. Constant sacrifice for scraps of recognition. I gave up my 20s to that business. I didn't date seriously, didn't build much of a social life, didn't even take vacations. Every decision I made revolved around the company, around my parents, around the belief that I was securing a future for myself. And the cruelest part? Deep down, I thought I was happy doing it. I thought I was on the right path. Little did I know, every ounce of energy I poured into that business was just setting me up for the biggest betrayal of my life. I can still remember the exact moment my parents fired me. It's burned into my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those heavy, gray days when the air feels thick. I'd been up late the night before finishing payroll because Jake had forgotten to do it. Again, I walked into the office with coffee in one hand, a stack of invoices in the other, fully expecting another chaotic day. What I didn't expect was to see my parents sitting in the conference room with grim expressions, like they were about to deliver bad news to a stranger. "Sit down," my dad said. His voice was tight, rehearsed. I thought maybe a supplier had dropped us, or a customer was threatening to sue. I sat, waiting. My mom clasped her hands together on the table, eyes downcast, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. And then my dad said it. Plain, cold, matter of fact, "We're going to have to let you go." First I laughed, literally laughed, thinking it was some kind of dark joke. But then I saw their faces. They were serious, dead serious. I stammered something. "What do you mean? Let me go. This is my life. I've given everything to this business." My mom sighed and finally looked up at me. "Honey, the economy has been rough. Sales are down. We can't afford to keep everyone on payroll. We had to make a choice." A choice. I felt my stomach twist. "You're cutting me? Out of everyone. You're cutting me?" My dad leaned forward, his tone suddenly sharp. "Jake is still young. He needs stability. If we cut him, he'll spiral. You're resourceful. You'll land on your feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brother, the guy who spent more time scrolling his phone than helping customers, was being kept on staff while I, the one who had literally built their systems, negotiated their deals, and sacrificed my entire future, was being discarded like I was nothing. The conversation blurred after that. I remember my mom trying to soften the blow, saying things like, "This isn't personal," and "We'll always love you." My dad tried to justify it by calling it a strategic decision. But none of it mattered. The truth was clear. My parents didn't see me as family. They saw me as expendable labor. I walked out of that building numb, carrying a box of my things like some low-level employee they didn't need anymore. No thank you speech. No acknowledgement of the years I gave them. Just a cold, clean cut. Jake had the audacity to smirk at me as I passed his office. "Tough break, man," he said, twirling a pen between his fingers. I wanted to punch him, but I didn't. I just walked out. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was realizing what it meant. All those sacrifices, all the missed milestones of my life, all the years I'd poured into building their business. None of it had mattered. My parents had chosen him over me. And that wasn't about money. That was about love. That was the day something inside me broke. I didn't know it at the time, but that betrayal would ignite something in me. A drive, a hunger, a fire to prove that I wasn't disposable. That one day they'd regret underestimating me. But back then all I felt was pain. And for a while that pain consumed me. Losing that job wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It was like losing my entire identity. For years, the business had been my whole world. Without it, I didn't know who I was anymore. At first, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. I'd bounce back. My parents said I was resourceful, right? I updated my resume, applied for dozens of jobs, even went on a few interviews. But every time I sat across from a hiring manager, I realized how little I had outside of the family company. My entire experience was tied to that one place. And to make matters worse, whenever they asked why I left, I couldn't exactly say. My parents fired me to keep my lazy brother around, so I lied. I said I wanted to pursue new opportunities. But the truth gnawed at me. I felt like damaged goods. The money ran out faster than I expected. I'd been paid less than market value for years because my parents always framed it as me investing in my future. Now, with no savings and bills piling up, I had to take whatever odd jobs I could find. Delivering packages, stocking shelves in actual retail stores that weren't mine, doing freelance bookkeeping for small shops. I went from being the unofficial COO of a mid-sized company to scraping by on gig work. The humiliation was suffocating. I couldn't run into old customers without feeling a pang of shame. They'd ask, "Hey, aren't you working at your family's place?" And I'd have to force a smile and say, "Not anymore." Sometimes they'd look confused, sometimes pitying. Both reactions cut like knives. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying everything in my head. The years I gave up, the moments I missed, the fact that Jake, the guy who couldn't even balance a cash drawer, was still there, sitting in my office, living the life I had built for myself. I spiraled into anger, then despair, then anger again. There were days I didn't want to get out of bed. Depression crept in, heavy and relentless. I felt worthless, abandoned, like a fool for ever believing loyalty meant something. My friends tried to help, but after years of me putting them second to the business, most of them had drifted away. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It leaves you with a choice. You can either stay there, drowning in self-pity, or you can start clawing your way back up. It didn't happen overnight. At first, it was just survival, taking jobs, paying bills, eating cheap takeout. But slowly, piece by piece, I started to see a different path. The skills I had, negotiating contracts, running payroll, organizing operations, were valuable. They weren't just tied to my parents' business. They could work anywhere. One night, after another grueling shift at a warehouse, I opened my laptop and started sketching out an idea. Not for my parents' business, not for Jake, not for anyone else. For me. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment the seeds of my comeback were planted. The betrayal had destroyed me, yes, but it also freed me, and little by little, I was about to turn that pain into power. At first, my comeback didn't look like much of a comeback at all. It was just me at a cheap desk in a one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scribbled notes. I didn't have investors, I didn't have a team, and I sure as hell didn't have the security blanket of my parents' business anymore. All I had was a laptop, an old printer, and the determination not to let their betrayal define the rest of my life. The idea started simple, consulting for small businesses. Nothing glamorous, just helping mom-and-pop shops streamline their operations, set up better inventory systems, or negotiate with suppliers. I charged next to nothing in the beginning, sometimes just enough to cover gas money, but every successful project was like a shot of adrenaline. For the first time, I was proving my worth outside of my family's shadow. Word spread slowly, but it spread. A bakery told a cafe about me, the cafe told a local mechanic, the mechanic introduced me to a small distribution company. Each client meant another line on my resume, another case study I could show. I wasn't rolling in cash, but I was surviving, and more importantly, I was building something that was mine. Of course, the road wasn't smooth. There were weeks I didn't know how I'd pay rent. There were nights I questioned if I was delusional, chasing some fantasy of independence while everyone else my age was climbing corporate ladders with benefits and stability. I ate more ramen noodles in those years than I'd like to admit. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that conference room, the way my dad's voice had been so cold, the way my mom couldn't even look at me, the smug look on Jake's face. That memory fueled me like rocket fuel. After a year of grinding, I finally landed my first big break. A mid-sized logistics company struggling with outdated systems. They were losing money hand over fist, and I pitched them a complete overhaul of their operations. I spent weeks preparing, putting together a proposal that outlined every flaw in their process and exactly how I'd fix it. When they signed the contract, I cried in my car. Not just because of the money, though it was the most I'd ever made in one deal, but because it was proof. Proof that I wasn't just resourceful as my parents had dismissed me. I was capable. I was valuable. That deal opened doors I never thought possible. Suddenly, I wasn't just scraping by. I was gaining momentum. Other companies started reaching out. My reputation grew. I upgraded from working out of my apartment to renting a small office. Then I hired my first employee, then another. Before I knew it, I wasn't just a consultant anymore. I was building a real company. And here's the kicker. The industry I was breaking into? The same one my parents operated in. Every efficiency I introduced, every client I saved, every innovation I brought forward, it was exactly what I'd once begged them to implement. They had ignored me. Now I was doing it on my own and succeeding. At first, I tried not to think about them. But the truth is, every victory felt a little sweeter knowing I was inching closer to their level. They had written me off, discarded me, chosen Jake over me. And now I was proving step by step that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. What I didn't realize then was just how close our paths were about to cross again. Growth has a funny way of sneaking up on you. One moment, you're just trying to scrape together rent and convince people to take a chance on you. The next, you realize you're sitting in an office with 20 employees, signing contracts worth more than you ever thought you'd see in your bank account. That's what happened to me. The consulting gigs had turned into full-service contracts. Small businesses recommended me to bigger ones. Bigger ones connected me to regional players. Within a few years, my little side hustle had become a company with real weight in the market. We specialized in streamlining supply chains, cutting waste, and modernizing operations. Everything I'd begged my parents to do, but they had always dismissed as too risky. The more clients I signed, the more I noticed a trend. Many of them had once worked with my parents' business. Some had left because of poor service, others because the company just hadn't adapted with the times. Every time I onboard one of their former customers, it felt like poetic justice. Not only was I succeeding, I was succeeding directly where they had failed. I didn't set out to target them, but the overlap was inevitable. We were in the same industry, in the same region. Competition was bound to happen. Still, I kept my head down, focused on building my company, and tried not to let personal feelings dictate my decisions. But then something shifted. One day at a trade show, I ran into Jake. He was representing my parents' company, standing at their booth with his usual smug grin. The booth looked dated, their branding stale, while mine was buzzing with curious clients and a sleek, modern setup. The look on his face when he saw me shaking hands with executives was priceless. It was the first time he realized I wasn't just scraping by anymore. I was a threat. And honestly, that moment lit a fire in me. From then on, I stopped pretending it wasn't personal. Every deal I signed, every innovation I rolled out, every employee I hired, I thought of that smirk of that conference room where they tossed me aside. My success wasn't just about me anymore. It was about proving them wrong. Within 5 years, my company was considered one of the top competitors in the region. We weren't just catching up, we were overtaking them. I saw their name popping up less and less in industry reports, while mine kept climbing. Their reputation was fading. Ours was shining brighter. I heard whispers, too, that their margins were shrinking, that suppliers were frustrated, that employees were leaving for better opportunities, some of them leaving for me. And each time I shook hands with a new hire who used to work under my parents, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and bitter satisfaction. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally in control. Not just of my future, but of my narrative. They had fired me believing I was expendable, believing I'd land on my feet somewhere far away, never a threat to them. Instead, I had risen from the ashes of their rejection and built something stronger, smarter, and sharper. But I didn't know then just how close their downfall was, or how much power I'd soon have over whether they survived or collapsed. I didn't expect the call. Honestly, I thought if I ever heard from my parents again, it would be at some awkward family holiday dinner where they pretended nothing had happened. But instead, it came on a Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of a strategy meeting with my executive team. I saw my mom's name flash on my phone. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. We hadn't spoken in years. But curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out of the room to answer. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Honey, we need to talk." That was my first hint something was wrong. My mom never sounded vulnerable. Not with me, not with anyone. I braced myself. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. The business was failing. Sales had been dropping for years. Their systems were outdated. Loyal customers had drifted away. Some of them to my company, though she didn't say that out loud. Suppliers were demanding payments they couldn't keep up with. Employees were leaving faster than they could replace them. And Jake? He wasn't stepping up. Apparently, he spent more time golfing than managing the actual business. They were circling the drain, and for the first time, they were admitting it. I remember leaning against the hallway wall, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to scream. After everything they had done, after firing me like I was nothing, after choosing Jake over me, they had the audacity to come crawling back. My mom's voice cracked when she finally said it. "We need your help." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang, let her squirm. She rushed to fill the space with flattery. How smart I was, how proud they were of what I'd built, how only I could save the company. I could practically hear the years of arrogance crumbling in her tone. When she passed the phone to my dad, it was even worse. The man who once looked at me like I was expendable was suddenly begging. He said words I never thought I'd hear from him. "We made a mistake. We should have never let you go." And just like that, the tables had turned. I hung up that call with my heart pounding. On one hand, this was everything I'd ever wanted. Acknowledgement, validation, proof that I had been right all along. On the other hand, it was an opportunity, maybe the opportunity to decide their fate. When I told my executive team what happened, one of them joked, "So, are you going to play savior or executioner?" I didn't laugh, because that was exactly the choice in front of me. I had the power. For the first time, I wasn't the discarded son begging for scraps of approval. I was the one holding the knife. The question was, would I use it to cut them free, or to finish what they started? After that phone call, I couldn't focus on anything else. My team was still in the conference room, waiting to finalize strategies for our next expansion, but my mind was spinning. For years, I'd fantasized about this moment, about my parents finally realizing their mistake, about them crawling back and admitting I had been the one holding everything together all along. And now it had actually happened. But instead of satisfaction, what I felt was complicated. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat in my apartment, staring at the city skyline. My parents' words replayed in my head on a loop. "We need your help. We made a mistake. Only you can save us." It was surreal. This was the same family that had tossed me aside like garbage, who had chosen my brother over me without hesitation, who had left me scrambling just to survive. And now, when they were drowning, they wanted me to throw them a lifeline. The vengeful part of me, the part that still remembered carrying that box of my belongings out of their office, wanted to let them sink, to watch their empire crumble and smile knowing I had built something better. That voice in my head said, "They deserve this, every last bit of it." But then another part of me whispered, "What does it make you if you let them fall? Are you any better than they were?" I wrestled with that question for days. My friends, the few I still trusted, were split. Some told me to take the high road, to prove I was the bigger person. Others told me I'd be insane to sacrifice my hard-earned success just to bail out people who had treated me like dirt. Even my team had opinions. My CFO warned that helping them could be risky for our own company. We'd be taking on debt, outdated systems, and a failing reputation. It could drag us down, she said bluntly. My COO, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. If we acquire them, we can absorb their client base and expand faster. But it only works if you're willing to be ruthless. And that was the crux of it. Helping them meant one of two things. Either I saved their company and put them back in control, or I used their desperation to take everything from them under the guise of a rescue. I kept imagining the look on Jake's face. The smugness, the entitlement, the belief that he was untouchable. I thought about all the years I had given up for them, all the sacrifices that went unrecognized. Could I really forgive that? Could I really put family above justice or revenge? The truth was, the decision wasn't just about business. It was about identity. Was I still the desperate son seeking their approval, or had I finally grown into someone who didn't need it? One morning, after another sleepless night, I looked at myself in the mirror and said out loud, "You don't owe them anything." And with that, the choice started to crystallize. I wasn't going to save their company, at least not in the way they wanted. Once I made the decision, everything moved quickly. Business doesn't wait for feelings to catch up, and I had to act before second-guessing could creep back in. My parents thought I was considering their plea. For a week, they kept calling, leaving voicemails that ranged from pitiful to manipulative. My mom would beg, "Please, honey, think of the family." My dad would try to sound authoritative, saying things like, "This is your responsibility too. Don't forget where you came from." And Jake? He sent me a single smug text. "Guess you finally realize you can't cut it without us." That message sealed the deal. Behind the scenes, I started making moves. My company had connections with investors who were already eyeing my parents' business like vultures circling a wounded animal. They saw opportunity in its carcass, suppliers, infrastructure, client lists. All it needed was someone ruthless enough to pull the trigger. That someone was me. I didn't approach my parents directly. Instead, I worked through intermediaries, staying in the shadows. On paper, it looked like an independent competitor was negotiating the buyout. In reality, every clause, every stipulation, every condition of the deal had my fingerprints on it. I'll never forget the day the news went public. Headlines circulated in the industry, "Struggling family business acquired by competitor." I sat at my desk, reading the article with a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This was the company I had once dreamed of inheriting, the place I had sacrificed my youth for. And now it was mine, not as a gift but as a conquest. When the paperwork was finalized, I finally stepped out of the shadows. My parents walked into the final meeting expecting to see a stranger across the table. Instead, they saw me. The look on their faces was indescribable. My mom gasped like she'd seen a ghost. My dad's jaw clenched, his entire posture stiff with shock. And Jake? For once, his smirk was gone. He looked pale, like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. "I told you I'd land on my feet," I said quietly, sliding the final contract across the table. They signed. They had no choice. Their debts were too deep, their options too few. And just like that, the business that had been in our family for generations passed out of their hands and into mine. Walking out of that room, I felt a rush of vindication unlike anything I'd ever experienced. All the pain, all the sacrifice, all the betrayal, it had led to this moment. I hadn't just survived. I had won. But victory is never as clean as you imagine. Because later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, the questions started to creep in. Had I done the right thing? Was this justice or cruelty? I stared at the signed contract, the ink still fresh, and realized the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about proving myself to my parents anymore. It would be about living with the choice I'd made. I had let them fall. Worse, I'd been the one to push. It's been months since the acquisition, and I still wake up some mornings with a knot in my stomach. The company is thriving under my leadership. We've modernized operations, reclaimed lost clients, and even expanded into new markets. By every measurable standard, I've succeeded. I'm respected in the industry. People admire what I've built. And yet, I can't shake the weight of what I did to my parents. They're still alive, still adjusting to life without the business that defined them for decades. I hear whispers from old neighbors and family friends. They're bitter, confused, even resentful toward me. My mother occasionally leaves voicemails begging me to consider helping them, though I don't respond. My father avoids me entirely. And Jake, well, he's nowhere to be found. I ask myself every day, was this revenge, or was it justice? On one hand, I gave everything to a company that spat me out. I sacrificed years of my youth, missed milestones, and was discarded in favor of my underachieving brother. If anyone deserved to benefit from my hard work, it was me. I turned betrayal into power, failure into opportunity, and built something that proved my worth beyond a shadow of doubt. On the other hand, I let them fail. I didn't just step aside and let the business falter. I orchestrated the takeover. I had the power to save them, and I chose not to. I didn't extend a lifeline. I didn't offer a compromise. I took what they had built, polished it, and left them with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. I've thought about writing them letters, about explaining that this wasn't just about money or revenge, that it was about finally taking control of my life. But every time I try, I can't, because even my explanation would sound hollow. They know the truth. They know I had the power to help and didn't. And that's why I'm asking you all. AITA? Am I the asshole for letting the people who betrayed me suffer the consequences of their own actions, even when I had the power to change it? Am I justified in protecting my life, my success, and my future, or did I cross a line by turning my personal vendetta into their downfall? Some nights I feel righteous. I tell myself that loyalty is earned, not owed, and that I finally got what I deserved after being cast aside for years. Other nights, guilt creeps in, and I wonder if I've become the very type of person I despised, the one who takes pleasure in another's ruin. I don't know if I'll ever have an answer. Maybe there isn't one. All I know is this. The business is mine now, the past is behind me, and the question remains, was I the hero, the villain, or just someone who finally stopped being a victim? So Reddit, AITA,